Alright guys, how's it going? Whoop, get that out of the way there. Okay, it's a pretty dreary day today. It's been raining since this morning. I'm in my big comfy hoodie. And just getting ready to read chapter 16. Alright, here we go. Piece of dust there. And now he stood at the end of the long part of the lake and was not the same, would not be the same again. There had been many first days. Just remember, last chapter was about the first meet. And he had killed one of those little birds, the fool birds. First arrow day, when he had used thread from his tattered old piece of windbreaker and some pitch from the stump to put slivers of feathers on a dry willow shaft and make an arrow that would fly correctly. Not accurately. He never got really good with it, but fly correctly so that if a rabbit or a fool bird sat in one place long enough, close enough, and he had enough arrows, he could hit it. That brought first rabbit day, when he killed one of the large rabbits with an arrow and skinned it as if he had the first bird, cooked it the same to find the meat as good, not as rich as the bird, but still good. And there were strips of fat on the back of the rabbit that cooked into the meat to make it richer. Now he went back and forth between rabbits and fool birds when he could, filling in with fish in the middle. Always hungry. I am always hungry, but I can do it now. I can get food. I know I can get food, and it makes me more. I know what I can do. He moved closer to the lake to a stand of nut brush. There were thick brushes with little stickler pods that held green nuts. Nuts that he thought he might be able to eat, but they weren't ripe yet. He was out for a fool bird, and they liked to hide in this base of the thick part of the nut brush, backing where the stems were close together and provided cover. In the second clump, he saw a bird, moved close to it, paused when the head feathers came up, and it made a sound like a cricket, a sign of alarm just before it flew. Then moved closer when the feathers went down and the bird relaxed. He did this 4 times, never looking at the bird directly, moving toward it at an angle so that it seemed he was moving off to the side. He had perfected this method after many attempts, and it worked so well that he had actually caught one with his bare hands, until he was standing less than 3 feet from the bird, which was frozen in a hiding attitude in the brush. The bird held for him, and he put an arrow to the bow, one of the feathered arrows, not a fish arrow, and drew and released. It was a clean miss, and he took another arrow out of the cloth pouch at his belt, which he'd made from a piece of his windbreaker sleeve, tied at one end to make a bottom. He's getting pretty crafty. The fool bird sat still for him, and he did not look directly at him until he drew the second arrow and aimed and released and missed again. This time, the bird jerked a bit, and the arrow stuck next to it so close it almost brushed its breast. Brian only had 2 more arrows, and he debated moving slowly to change the spear over to his right hand and use that to kill the bird. 1 more shot, he decided he would try again. He slowly brought another arrow out, put it on the string, and aimed and released, and this time saw the flurry of feathers that meant he had made a hit. The bird had been struck off center and was flopping around wildly. Brian jumped on it and grabbed it and slammed it against the ground once, sharply, killing it. Then he stood and retrieved his arrows and made sure that they were all right and went down to the lake to wash the blood off his hands. He kneeled at the water's edge and put the dead bird and his weapons down and dipped his hands into the water. And remember, he's doing this to survive. He would never do this to a bird just walking down the street. It was very nearly the last act of his life. Later, he would not know why he started to turn. Some smell or sound, a tiny brushing sound. But something caught his ear or nose, and he began to turn, and his head half around when he saw a brown wall of fur detach itself from the forest to his rear and come down on him like a runaway truck. He just had time to see that it was a moose. He knew from those pictures could not guess how large they were when it hit him. It was a cow, and she had horns, but she took him in the left side of the back with her forehead, took him and threw him out into the water, and then came after him to finish the job. He had another half second to fill the lungs with air, and she was on him again, using her head to drive him down into the mud of the bottom. Insane, he thought. Just that, the word, insane. Mud filled his eyes, his ears, the horn boss and the moose. Drove him deeper and deeper into the bottom muck, and suddenly it was over and he felt alone. He sputtered to the surface, sucking air and fighting panic, and when he wiped the mud and water out of his eyes and cleared them, he saw the cow standing sideways to him. not 10 feet away, calmly chewing on a lily pad root. She didn't appear to see him, or didn't seem to care about him. And Brian turned carefully and began to crawl out of the water. As soon as he moved, the hair on the back went up again. She charged to him again, using her head and front hooves this time, slamming him back and down into the water on his back this time. And he screamed the air out of his lungs and hammered on her head with his fist and filled his throat with water, and she left again. Once again, he came to the surface, but he was hurt now, hurt inside, hurt in his ribs, and he stayed hunched over, pretended to be dead. She was standing again, eating. Brian studied her out of one eye, looking to the bank with the other, wondering how seriously he was injured, wondering if she would let him go this time. Insane. He started to move, ever so slowly. Her head turned, her back hair went up, like the hair on an angry dog, and he stopped. Took a slow breath, the hair went down, and she ate. Move, hair up, stop, hair down. Move, hair up, a half a foot at a time, until he was on the edge of the water. He stayed on his hands and knees, indeed, was hurt, so he wasn't sure he could walk anyway, and she seemed to accept that and let him crawl slowly out of the water and up into the trees and the brush. When he was behind a tree, he stood carefully and took stock. Legs seemed all right, but his ribs were hurt bad. He could only take short breaths, and then he had jabbing pain, and his right shoulder seemed to be wrenched somehow. Also, his bow and spear and foolbird were in the water. At least he could walk, and he had just about decided to leave everything when the cow moved up out of the deep water and left him as quickly as she'd come, walking down along the shoreline in the shallow water with her long legs making sucking sounds when she pulled them free from the mud. Hanging on a pine limb, he watched her go, half expecting her to turn and come back to run over him again. But she kept going, and when she was well gone from sight, he went to the bank and found the bird, then waited out a bit to find his bow and spear. Neither of them was broken, and the arrows, incredibly, were still in his belt in the pouch, although messed up with mud and water. It took him most of an hour to work his way back around the lake. His legs worked well enough, but if he took 2 or 3 fast steps, he would begin to breathe deeply, and the pain from his ribs would stop, and he would have to lean against a tree until he could slow back down to shallow breathing. She had done more damage than he had originally thought. The insane cow. No sense at all, just madness. When he got to the shelter, he crawled inside and was grateful that the coals were still glowing and that he had thought to get wood first thing in the morning so he'd be ready for the day. Grateful that he had thought to get enough wood for 2 or 3 days at a time. Grateful that he had already had fish nearby if he needed to eat. Grateful, finally, as he dozed off, that he was alive. So insane, he thought, letting sleep cover the pain in his chest. Such an insane attack for no reason. And he fell asleep with his mind, trying to make the moose have a reason. And the noise awakened him. It was a low sound, a low roaring sound that came from the wind. His eyes snapped open because it was loud, but it was new. He felt wind in his shelter, felt the rain that came with wind, and heard thunder many times in the past 47 days, but not this noise. Low, almost alive, almost from a throat of something. The noise was a roar, a far-off roar, but coming at him, and when he was fully awake, he sat up in the darkness, grimacing with pain in his ribs. The pain was different now, a tightened pain, and it seemed less, but the sound. So strange, he thought, a mystery sound, a spirit sound, a bad sound. He took some small wood and got the fire going in, felt a little comfort and cheer from the flames, but also felt that he should get ready. He did not know how, but he should get ready. The sound was coming for him, just for him, and he had to get ready. The sound wanted him. He found the spear and the bow where they were hanging on the pegs of the shelter, on the shelter wall, and brought his weapons to the bed he had made of pine boughs. More comfort, but like the comfort of the flame, it didn't work with this new threat that he didn't understand yet. Restless threat, he thought, and stood out of the shelter away from the flames to study the sky, but it was too dark. The sound meant something to him, something from his memory, something he had to read about, something he had seen on television, something... Oh, he thought, oh no, it was the wind. Wind like the sound of a train with the low belly roar of a train. It was a tornado. A tornado! That's what it was. The roar of a train meant bad wind, and it was coming for him. God, he thought, on the top of the moose, not this. But it was too late to do anything in the strange stillness. He looked to the night sky, then turned back into the shelter and was leaning over to go through the door opening when it hit. Later, he He would think of it and find that it was the same as the moose, just insanity.